Call this meeting to order, this regular City Council work session this Tuesday, May 20th. The clerk will call the roll.
Mayor Walcott.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Villanueva. Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Councilmember Tandy.
Here.
Councilmember Biondo.
Here.
And Councilmember Winters.
Here.
Thank you.
If you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we have 3 items on our work session agenda this evening, and we're going to begin with a presentation and update on the surprise transportation plan. Martine, I'm assuming you're going to be providing that for us this evening.
Yes, I will.
Long-awaited update. We're sorry to keep pushing you back and grateful for your patience. Not to my knowledge.
No, it'd be great if it was, though. Madam Mayor and councilmen and councilwomen, I'm actually pretty happy to come over and begin to give you an update on what's happening out in the transportation world here for Surprise. And I'm trying to keep this pretty short and try to keep it pretty concise. I'll make the invitation to you that I've always made out to the public, planning and zoning, and to Skip, as I work with Skip quite a bit, is if you have any questions, always feel free to give me a call. I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have, whether it be on this or on any other transportation planning issue. For the presentation today, I'm going to go ahead and present on identified plans and policies, why we develop plans and policies for the City of Surprise, the impacts and benefits, as well as the timing that we have for the transportation plan update. One of the biggest things that we've been able to identify is the need to be able to update the Surprise transportation plan. It's been over 5 years since the last time it was updated. However, 5 years ago when it was updated, it was missing some of the general planning tools that most communities have. And so in order to be able to do this next plan update, we identified 5 additional plans or policies or standards that needed to occur to be able to make sure that we had the most current tools in your hands so that way you can evaluate things as they come forward. Part of that is an access management plan, a bicycle pedestrian plan, a complete streets guidelines and policies. Again, that's not a plan. Those are guidelines and policies. A major thoroughfare plan, as well as a transit plan. All these components will add up to a majority of what needs to be updated inside this Surprise transportation plan. Also, none of these will take the place of anything that's been found in the general plan or in the upcoming village plans or any of the other plans that we have either in Public Works or other Park and Recs developments there. All these plans will be going hand in hand and kind of just filling the gaps. So why develop plans and policies? For the most part, it's to create consistency and to be able to help bring in proper infrastructure and signage. It's also to kind of help out with some safety issues that are out there. It's to be able to make sure that we don't leave any one part of our public out. It also helps in the consideration of existing and potential uses of streets and land uses. One of the things that we really try to consider when taking a look at a complete transportation plan are the land uses around those infrastructures. One of the good examples I have is I had the opportunity of starting my career out in Texas, moving into Mexico. And when I was in both of those states, the biggest thing that people love to do out there is ride horses. In the Southwest, they had the right to be able to take their horses, go out in the streets in both states. When I moved here to Arizona, one of the neat things I noticed was the city of Glendale actually has horse trails. So if you go down 59th Avenue, they have a big horse trail right on the side of the road. You don't have to worry about that horse being in the roadway, but that horse has the opportunity to go up and down. I'm not saying that we need horse trails here in the Surprise. We might. It just depends on the area. It depends on the use, and that's kind of one of the things that good design standards and guidelines provide us. So the first one that I wanted to discuss is the access management plan. I actually had an opportunity to be able to send this out on a separate cover to you. We've been able to complete this plan to about 90%, to be able to go ahead and fill in some of the gaps that we're missing and to be able to standardize some of the good policies we've already had in place. We do have an access management plan. However, it only covers Bell Road. So what does an access management plan really do, and why do we need to consider that? It helps to apply different amounts of access or connectivity depending on the land use. So one way to consider this is a ladder and how ladders work. You have big runs that run up, and then you have the runs that go sideways horizontally, and that gives you the structure and the ability to be able to move up and down. And so what happens here is we have like Loop 303 or I-10 or I-17. Those have very little access points, but you have the ability to move vehicles as fast as you possibly can in a very safe and concise manner. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum is your driveway at home. All right, everybody needs to be able to access their house. Everybody needs to be able to go in and out, except the amount of traffic that moves is very low compared to the highway. The speeds are very low as well. However, the access is very high. And so to be able to do a good access management plan will actually allow the safety aspect to come in play because you're considering the uses that go around that. The other thing it also considers is the type of people who are using those facilities. And so you have some parkway designs that allow bicycles and some that don't. You have some collectors that allow parking on the sides and some that don't. And it just depends on what land uses you have, what economic development has occurred, or what facilities are located around there. The one after that we're going to start here, right after the access management plan, and which we've already begun to move forward with a little bit, is the complete streets. These are policy and guidelines. These work hand in hand with the standards that are developed in the engineering department. And the important thing to consider here is on a complete streets guidelines and policies are the considerations of the land uses around them. So for this downtown area and in some bigger downtown areas, you have pedestrian streets where the street is completely closed except for transit and pedestrians. And that's a valid complete street, even though you don't have any vehicles moving up and down it. Then you have other considerations on the complete opposite of the spectrum where you just have vehicles moving forward. One of the important things here is that the federal government requires that these policy and guidelines be in place if we expect to continue to apply for federal funds. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why we need to be able to have a complete street standards and guidelines, so that way we can go ahead and point back that we actually have policies in place to consider all the various types of modes and transportations, to be able to consider how those people will interact with each other and those other modes will interact with each other. Jurisdictions all the way from the federal government have complete street policies, and it should go all the way down to the local agencies as well. The thing after that we're going to try to touch base with is the bicycle pedestrian plan. The city of Surprise has a de facto bike ped plan. It was kind of developed with an outside group, and Parks and Recs are working with them well hand in hand. We do have some trails identified, a lot of bike trails already identified, and we just want to make this more of an official document. We also want to be able to consider what happened in MAP 21. In 2010, the US DOT came out with a statement and policies on the bicycle and pedestrians accommodations that need to be required. And so this is word from the Federal Registry that states, all agencies have the responsibility to improve conditions and opportunities for walking and bicycling and to integrate walking and bicycling into their transportation system. Prior to that, it was just an option. Now it's a responsibility. So we can't leave anybody behind any longer. And so our transportation facilities must include modes of transportations other than vehicles. And so that's the first time they've actually come out that strong and stated that. Timing. As far as the timing here, we have the access management plan that we're going to bring back, and we sent out to the city council. We're hoping to get direction to be able to take that to planning and zoning. We feel that a majority of these plans probably should be going through the Planning and Zoning Commission to be able to help them understand the tools that they will have available to be able to make some of the decisions. Some of the other options is just to be able to bring them to City Council through the Development Committee, and to be able to have your opportunity to be able to view those, and to be able to give your opinions and your options on what you would like to see. And the reason being behind that is because the way I like to think of it is everybody has the option to be able to create these plans. Everybody creates these plans, different cities do, but everybody puts their different spin on it, so everybody has a different flavor. You can think about it like going to Baskin Robbins. There's 31 flavors. Which one do you like? You know, do we want to be more like Scottsdale? Do we want to have our own flavor? Do we want to be known for certain types of facilities or certain types of planning? After we're able to go through and get a little bit more information from our Planning and Zoning Commission, from you, from other staff members, we'd like to solidify this access management plan, bring it back to council sometime in the summer to actually bring it back as a document to be able to be adopted as a separate plan. The reason this gives a little bit more weight, much like the Bell Access Management Plan that's in effect right now, when developers come in and ask the question why, we can state this was a plan that was vetted, that council understands, that council has some backing, and this is what we would like to do in this city. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything in that plan will affect every single project. What the Access Management Plan does is just give us the tools to be able to ask for the things that we would like to see done along our facilities. After that, we'd like to go ahead and bring before you the complete streets guidelines and policies, and then run through that much like we will with the Access Management Plan. I'm envisioning initially either doing that in July or in August, and then going through the planning and zoning and returning back to City Council once again. We'll be doing that with all these different sub-plans, and I'll be coming on a more regular basis to be able to present these things to you and to be able to get some feedback. I also will be sending these things, hopefully, through a separate cover, and so that way you will have an opportunity to be able to read it at your leisure, be able to provide comments or ask questions. So before I get to my questions and comments on this, I would like to also add a little bit more information. We've been able to attend, staff has, information in public meetings as well as different committee meetings for Bell and Grand. Everybody was stating that you wish it was built. I'd like to report that the ADOT and MAG and the federal government and everybody's come to a consensus that this project is going to move forward. No matter what it costs, they're going to provide the funding for it, and that this project is moving forward on a timetable that is more current than what it has been in the past. And so we're actually looking at June 30th of seeing something going out to the public for bid, and that's the current timetable. At that point in time, we're looking at late fall for a 30% to 60%, depending on how fast they're able to go. And then from there, it kind of just moves depending on what is found during the initial design. They're also looking at hopefully bidding this out either as a CMAR or as a DBB, which is a design bid build project, which will also streamline the process a lot smoother. So at this point in time, I'd like to stand for any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Martine. And Council, I just wanted to let you know, too, one of the things that I felt was really important is because these plans are going to have an impact, and they are a tool for how we move forward in development. And we are kind of turning the tide and planning a new day, working with our Planning Commission more closely as we develop the city and develop our plans. I felt that it was very important that Martine start here so that you know what's happening before he takes those plans through the Planning Commission process and then brings them back to us, so that we're not just handed a document that's been passed by the Planning Commission without any contextual understanding of what's been going on. So I appreciate you bringing us up to speed. And I think that this will make for a better informed council, final decision, and a more well-rounded team effort to make sure that what we do moving forward is in the best interests of the citizens of Surprise. Real quick, I wanted to ask, because I've got several questions, but I want to get to council. Real quick, I wanted to ask you about the access management plan only being for Bell Road. What was the date that that access management plan for Bell Road was put into place?
It was actually adopted, I believe, 2007, 2008. It was to help streamline Bell for the projects that were foreseen to come forward. And so some of those projects are currently underway. The Bell Sidewalk project, which will be starting here this summer, which will take sidewalks from the park and ride all the way out to 115th Avenue. Also the Bell Grand project, the El Mirage and Bell project, what has occurred, is following the Bell Access Management Plan. So currently what we've done is, now that we're getting some more developers coming in for projects off of Bell, we've been referring them back to the Bell Management Access Plan, which was specifically done for that corridor. And what it's doing is it's limiting the amount of additional curb cuts. It's also taking out some curb cuts, and it's also helping us identify intersections that need to be further studied. So one of the things that we noticed in that plan is that in 2005 to 2008 time, we had a really big boom. And the amount of traffic there has never died off. It's never laid off. And a matter of fact, the amount of accidents along that corridor have somewhat increased a little bit. And so we know that that plan needs to be implemented as soon as possible and in a regular basis to be able to start making it safer for that corridor and actually help that corridor function more properly.
So in relationship to the Bell Road projects that this was attempting to address, did it have an impact on how, for example, our new Cobalt Medical facility is located and how there's ingress and egress from that piece of property? Did it have an impact?
I would have to take a look back at the Bell plan to be able to make sure that it was addressed in the Cobalt one. But I know for the last 3 months, any developer that's come in that's been bringing in any project along Bell, we first sent them to this plan to be able to make sure that the access was addressed appropriately.
And the Bell and 303 corridor, is that all addressed in the access management plan?
It was actually, that was the tail end of it, just right before that, and then it would go all the way out to our eastern border. So it was spanning the full width of our city.
So there's no access management plan west of the 303?
Not at this time.
Interesting. Okay. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. Good point. Good question, Mayor. And we need to think about that. There's a lot of things over there that need to be looked at, as we all know. Right, Roland? I got a couple things. Make sure you keep the golf carts in mind when you're talking about modes. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think in general, I would like to see better signage regarding permitting golf carts, so that people know that. I think there's a speed limit. Anything over 35 miles an hour, they're not allowed on that street, right? Mm-hmm. And so just for some of our new residents that come, and they're moving around commercially up and down the the two big shopping centers, et cetera. Mm-hmm. When we get Mountain View done, that's going to help a lot. Sun City Grand people coming down to Walmart or Target, they can go down by a golf cart, take them off Grand. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Sun Village coming north to Trader Joe's and all the medical out there. So anyway, Mountain View is going to help a lot. But the other thing is on Litchfield, south of Bell. Mm-hmm. I've got a concern, and I'm not sure what we can do about it. But take a look at it's the driveway coming out of Irish Wolfhound. You know where I'm at. You know where I'm at now. And you can. I've seen this done a lot. People cut across Litchfield, going into the road behind that runs parallel to Bell Road behind all the restaurants. And I think the reasoning there is that we didn't want people to do that, or we didn't want them turning left, is because it's so close to that intersection. I think that's the thought process.
One of the interesting things is through the access management plan, as you notice there, they actually talk about driveway spacing and how close driveways should be depending on the land use as well as the amount of speed that's involved. And so this plan hopefully will help address issues in the future like that, or retrofits as we improve facilities. And so, yes, I completely understand where you're at. And
You know where I'm at there?
Yes.
People are turning left, going north on Litchfield. They're turning left into that driveway, and they're also coming out of the driveway at Irish Wolfhound and going across. Both things are happening
Yep.
quite often, and it's dangerous. Maybe it's I don't know. Just take a look at it. And with Mike Meacham, maybe there's a solution there. The only other thing I wanted to bring up right now is the sidewalk on Grand Avenue. Is that our sidewalk on the south side of Grand Avenue, or did the state put that in?
the sidewalk along Grand Avenue is a state facility. What we do, I believe we do, I'm not too sure, but I think we maintain the landscaping, but the facility itself, the sidewalk and the pavement is an ADOT facility.
Okay, but we maintain
The landscaping and the
okay,
median.
which we need to start doing, Martin, because there's weeds big time coming up all the cracks on the sidewalk. But it doesn't go all the way up. In other words, if you wanted to walk up to the medical or take your bicycle up, it dies up there, doesn't it? The sidewalk, it doesn't connect.
I would have to take a look. I'm not too sure.
Take a look at that too, because I think anything we can do to relieve Grand and Bell, the better off we are, you know? And I think we really need to take a look at that. All
Not
those
a
kind of
problem.
things, where people can drive their golf cart, they can ride their bike, they can walk, you know. Okay?
Not a problem.
Thanks, Martin.
Councilmember Tandy.
You mentioned horse trails, and I think as we plan the areas towards the west of Surprise, where we're going towards, I'd like to keep that in mind, because I think there's some real good geography and different attributes that might even enhance the value of the land if we had only those horse trails. Then also, I'd also like to talk about, I know Grand's a state highway, but the ingress and egress along that west of the 303, long term, my preference would be that we move that more towards a highway rather than with full grade separation interchanges, rather than having driveways into it here and there, or roads here into it here and there. But
And that's planned for here in the near future. That's actually gone past further than what Bell and Grand is. They've had their public outreach meeting about 6 weeks ago, and they're currently under design. And
Okay.
so that will be a half cloverleaf design, and so the cloverleaf will be on the north and on the south of Grand on the west side. So you'll have a half cloverleaf design, which will be grade separated, and it will actually add a second deck bridge just to the south of the current bridge,
Right.
and help expand the capacity for the 303.
I realize that, and that's good. What I'm talking about is even further west and going north. As we build out Surprise over the next 30, 40 years, I'd like to make sure they have a way to get downtown fast.
Okay, I understand where you're at.
Having stoplights along there, we need to have a fast access pathway where we eventually will have grade separations on all those intersections along there. And that's something we have to work with the state on.
I believe actually the state has already conducted an access management plan north of Grand, north of the 303 for that very reason, because the access management certainly was, there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid to Grand Avenue and the access management challenges that were made by all of the cities along the corridor that just punched a driveway in wherever they could. But they realized that they had to do something, so they drew the line at the 303, and they've got an access management plan that they've already conducted, I think a couple of years
I
ago.
think that's why Pat Tillman Road got built,
Pardon me?
as a parallel to Grand. When Lennar went in there with the Asante, built Pat Tillman Road, which runs parallel to Grand, so that kind of thing, just what the mayor's talking about, people got to come down to 163rd or they got to go up to whatever, rather than having another cut in there, you know? Those are the things we got to think about.
Yes.
Do you have something else, Councilmember Tandy? Councilmember Villanueva.
Good point.
Yes, I have a concern. I hear a lot of talk about the west side of Surprise, but we also have Coyote Lakes. We also have Ridge Village and also Rose Garden, that we never talk about any kind of trails or any kind of plans for that area. We have the bridge, that there's no way that they can cross that bridge without running into a car. So I just wonder if there's any plans for that side of the city, even including the OTS.
And yes, we have taken a look at that right now. The Bell Sidewalk Project will put sidewalks all the way from the park and ride, all the way past Coyote Lakes, all the way to 115th. So they'll be just east of New Coyote Lakes Drive. As far as the OTS, we have attempted in the last 6 months 3 different grant applications to be able to put in pedestrian facilities as well as some bike facilities, as well as some improvements in conjunction with CDBG. Unfortunately, those funds went to other places within the valley, but we have not forgot the OTS, and we will continue to try to provide those facilities as we can.
I have a real concern about the bridge, especially at night. The way that the color that it's painted, you can't even. You're driving. There's no lighting, and that bridge is dark at night. And I just wondered if there's any. I don't know if you have anything to do with it, or somebody does, but I think it's a little dangerous to go over that bridge at night without any lighting. And then the color of it, you can't even see the sides.
Well, I'll speak with Public Works, and I'll get the right people and get some discussion. I'll try to get some answers for you on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Vice Mayor touched on this earlier. How do you go about identifying areas that need retrofitting? For example, he brought up a couple of examples. I think at one point you looked at that turn into the north parking lot of the library, and that's such a short, I think you call that a storage amount of lane. How do you go about identifying those areas other than along Bell? Because I suspect there are a number of those same kinds of things throughout the city, and how do you build those into your overall plan?
Well, part of it, we've already done a street inventory, and so we have a gap analysis done for sidewalks, trails, as well as scallop streets. The engineering performed, I want to say, it's a 5-year-old plan. There's some improvements that have been done. There's some that still are left off. However, on the major thoroughfare plan, that's another identifying plan. A lot of times individuals think just because we have a map that identifies the classification for all the roads, that's our plan. That's the map. The plan actually takes that map and prioritizes roads in the future that need projects that have been identified through the CIP process from Public Works, and kind of gives a ranking of priority for those. It also takes a look at things like deficiencies in certain areas. So we'll be able to take a look at village plans, the general plans, and be able to take those deficiencies and put them in with the major thoroughfare plan for projects to take a look at areas that might need to be reevaluated. And maybe what we do is part of this major thoroughfare plan, we take a look at that gap analysis and try to see if there's been improvements or if there's additional warrants that need to be added into it. And so that's part of it. The other part is creating more specific corridor access management plans. This access management plan that we have identified is just a broad spectrum for the city in general, good practices, in general, what should be done. But like Bell Road, you can have certain access management plans done for certain corridors that need to be done to be able to identify improvements for those areas. And then through the bicycle pedestrian plan as well, that one will identify facilities that need to be improved for that type of mode and give a ranking priority. The last one I forgot to mention, and it's not because it's not important, is the transit plan. That transit plan is something that needs to be done. It'll probably be something that we need to go out and get professionally done and equipped, so that way we can have a timing as well as some good budgets that will give us an idea of what it would cost to be able to bring in a transit plan. But in this area, we've had 6 different transit plans performed. The most recent one's the Northwest Transit Study, which was done at about 3,000 foot level. And so for us, what we want to do is be able to take some of those more general plans and create something that's more specific for us, so that way we understand the timing and how that might work and better play with some of these other plans and facilities.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Nice presentation, Martin. Very good. Very informative. I have a question, though, for you. Why wasn't there any access management studies done on Bell Road west of the 303?
I think originally when they were done, when they were doing it, they were taking a look at Bell, at the full, the way the Bell was performed and completed and was functioning. It wasn't built to its full capacity quite yet. All the development and Surprise Farms hadn't completely hit yet. Some of the development out that far out hadn't been done quite yet. And so I think that's probably it. I have to take a look again and kind of see why they set the bookmarks where they were at. But my guess is just more of the actual facility and the way it was functioning, what was the commercial corridor at that point in time. And once you pass the 303 on the other side, it becomes more of a residential access to the subdivisions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to capitalize on what you just said. Yes, it does, west of the 303, become more of a residential feel. And so I'm glad you said that. The other question I had was on map 21, that I'm pleased to see the statement from the feds on the need to include, walking and biking modes. The one of the landmark pieces of legislation that really started down that road, or that path, should I say, is ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Investment Act, and it was, I think, the beginning of a very big movement to recognize that not everybody needs to make their transportation moves in a car. And so I'm pleased to see that, but I want to know, have they, in the map 21, actually maintained a certain portion of the federal funding pot that is sacred to that alternative mode?
They left that up to the states. And what they've actually done is they took 32 different categories that were originally underneath safety lou and condensed them down to about 8 or 12. And then any subcategory that used to be a part of the original 32, 34 is still available for funding at the state's discretion. So like ADOT has maintained funding for safe routes to school, except that's done through the safety pot. Because it's done through the safety pot, those projects are now competing with all safety projects. And so it's still valid project. They're still being able to make the application, except now you have to compete with the larger projects, with the larger pictures. And so it becomes a little bit more difficult.
So, in other words, that leaves us back to having to rely, rather than on map 21 for walking paths and bike path funding, it leaves us back to rely on grants. Is that your understanding? I mean, significantly, we don't have a whole lot of...
On grants, it relies a lot more on public-private partnerships. It relies more on the ability of us to be able to have a plan in place. So when development comes in, we're able to ask for the facilities that we need in the manner that we would like to see them. It really puts the onus on the city and the locals to be able to understand what they want in their community. Because if we don't know what we want, we get whatever we get.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so that being said, good lead into my next question. We were all presented a gap plan a few years ago, a gap analysis, And as I do recall, Councilmember Williams, we almost immediately identified gaps in the gap study. Has there been anything done to fill the gaps in the gap study since that meeting?
No, hopefully that's going to be part of this whole plan update. We're going to take it one chunk at a time. One of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that we got these more necessary tools in place. The way I like to explain it to individuals when I go out, especially my kids, I have a lot of younger children. They ask what I do, and one of my girls stood up in class and says, "My dad makes pretty maps." That's what I did, and I started laughing. I said, "Well, kinda." But what I explained to them is, it's like having a big jar, and you get these walnuts, and you stick them all in the walnuts, and then now you have a big bag of sand, and you pour the sand in there, and it all fits nice and neat when you pour it in that way. But if you give somebody the sand and they're looking at all the little pieces first, and they try to get all that sand in first, and then all of a sudden they try to put the walnuts in, the walnuts don't fit.
Right.
And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I took a look at and did an inventory of the plans and policies we had, and identified those walnuts, those pieces, those tools that you need to have to appropriately understand how land use, transportation, economic development, parks and rec, how all these pieces fit together. And then once you're able to get those all in the jar and you understand you have all these different tools at your disposal, then all these little projects as they come in fill in the gaps really nicely, and you don't have to worry about them.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's a great analogy. The walnuts and the sand is a great analogy about the access on Bell Road and Grand, major access points on Bell Road and Grand, and historically, let's just cram as much sand in there as we possibly can, and then we have no place to deal with the walnuts. Mm-hmm. So now we're in a situation where we've addressed some of the grains of sand on a certain section of Bell Road, but now we have uses that are trying to cram walnuts into a pile of sand west of the 303, and it's going to create problems from, I think, from this council's perspective. Yep. So I want to make sure we're continuing to focus on that, because I think that there needs to be a clear understanding of whether or not the walnuts actually fit in certain places. One last thing I wanted to ask about is the transit planning. The transit plan is extremely important, and yes, we need to know what it is we want. Mm-hmm. If we're going to go out and get it. Can't mm-hmm. just have some ethereal mindset. By God, we're going to have transit without having a plan. We also have to have a funding stream, or it will never work. And so when we know what we need to know what we want before we figure out how to pay for it. Unfortunately, a lot of folks go out and just say, let's figure out how to pay for something, and then we'll figure out what we want to buy later on. This is the cart we have to get right first, mm-hmm. is let's figure out what we want, and then we'll figure out a finance plan.
One thing to add to that that's very important is a lot of individuals think transit planning is just buying some light rail, putting the train carts out there, buying some buses, putting them out there. One of the issues that you have with transit is once you buy the big pieces, the physical equipment, you have to maintain that. You have to be able to operate that. You have to be able to know where they're going to go and operate. Because if it doesn't go to the right places, no one's going to ever be on it. And so it becomes a really expensive endeavor. And so that's kind of what we're trying to avoid. We're really trying to figure out exactly where are the origins, where's the destinations, what do people really need to be able to get back and forth and live without having a car.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, thanks very, very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Next item.
Presentation and discussion on the 2014 League resolutions process.
Mr. Salaya.
Madam Chair, members of the council, good evening. In preparation for our resolutions for this League's annual conference in August 19th through the 22nd, a focal point of the conference is the resolutions. And this process is something that we've sort of been engaged in quite a bit here in the last 4 or 5 years. And this year will be the same, no doubt. Sorry. And two, the process of the resolutions will also be changing after this year as well. But for the basis of so that you're what to expect when you go to the conference, you'll know what the resolutions is all about. And some of you, we've gone through quite a bit. And obviously, it's something that we work in collaboration with the League of Cities and the other 91 cities. And we're to sort of set up a strategic plan, as to speak. And, it's a form of advocacy and direction for us as we move forward through the session in 2015. Our municipal policy book, it's a manual that we put out every year. A lot of these resolutions will be incorporated in this policy. Well, they normally come out right after the conference. Usually in September, October, these policy manuals will come out. We've utilized those in the past to sort of jumpstart our discussions with our own legislators. As we do every November, December, we have a legislative breakfast going into the new session. We use this policy that we've had discussion with in the summer conference, and it sort of evolves as we go, especially with issues that impact the city of Surprise. We also use this opportunity to lobby, and hopefully at this conference we will be doing just that. And instead of, I know that we're doing the meet and greet and the networking, but I'm hopeful that we'll also go in with a plan this year of maybe some discussions of some issues impacting our city. And an example could be the SLIDS discussion moving forward. And I'll sort of wrap up on that a little bit after a few more slides. The municipal policy, of course, is our protection, our core principles. State shared revenue, something we protect quite a bit. Maintain local control, and you can also incorporate always being aware of the unfunded mandates that we always try to get stuck with from our legislators sometimes. The criteria for the resolutions are broadly, they're municipal, statewide, and generally fall in two categories. The first is a statement. For an example, is that it requires a specific action, such as requesting that the legislature amend the website posting requirements to exclude advisory committees. That is actually a true case. A second is a general policy position statement, such as supporting increases in transportation funding. We've had a lot of not just transportation funding, protection of the state parks, HER funding. These are examples. Resolutions must be sponsored by at least 2 cities or towns. An example of this was last year's fire district bill that the city of Peoria was the main sponsor in. We were the co-sponsor. This was developed out of a resolution that we utilized this year for this session that unfortunately went down in defeat in the waning hours of the session. Part of the process is that there's a lot of preparation just before we get to the conference, and there's a subcommittee that is formed. Primarily, we in the past have utilized council. We've used mayor to appoint on these committees to be a part of the actual layout of what's coming forward at the actual conference. And I think Councilmember Williams, you've been involved in quite a few of those. We've taken off the bandage on a few of them. But those are the things that we sort of go through in this subcommittee so that we sort of clean things up before it gets there to this round table. And the subcommittee puts each resolution in one of 4 categories: to adopt, to amend, to important issues, or not recommend. And these are the sequences that we follow in the actual committee meeting, and also in the subcommittee as well. So it sort of helps clean things up, move things forward a little bit, rather than start reading every little summary that's out there and attachment. As I mentioned, it's made up of mayor, or it can be made up of a council member, and it normally takes place in the afternoon of the first day of the conference. I'm going to skip a few because I want to get to the timeline. Obviously, we're already in play as how fast this is moving, and the resolution process does move quick. There's not a whole lot of time. I mean, either you have the issues that you want to bring forward, or you don't, and you wait till afterwards, or you do your own bill after the committee. But it gives you a little bit of a snapshot of our timeline here. We're already through the resolution workshop session that was the last couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, and now we're moving forward to the deadline. And right now, there should be a wealth of resolutions put forward, and as of today, there are only 3. So they're not moving very fast like they used to either. And I'll explain why after I'm finished with the timeline. And obviously, the deadline is June 6th in preparation for the resolutions to go before the subcommittee in July. And as we set up, looking for August 19th, our first actual meeting, and for confirmation a couple of days later at the executive committee level. I'd like to close with this, that the resolutions process it's a do or die sometimes. I mean, a lot of cities, bigger cities, avoid the resolution process, especially if it's a high profile issue. They don't want to give a lot of face time to it till it's time. So you won't see like a lot of the core issues until after the resolutions. It's really primarily, from my understanding too, and hearing the discussion today with the league representatives, that the rural communities, it gives them an opportunity to come forward and sort of work some of these issues out for themselves as well. So there's a combination of many things going on during the development of the resolutions. And yes, they're 85% from rural communities when you do go and see and observe yourself what's happening on the floor for resolutions. Again, there's statewide implication. They're not necessarily for 1 or 2 cities. For example, hyper-growth communities such as Surprise, Buckeye, Queen Creek, even Gilbert and Chandler areas. We probably will wait for issues that surround us after the resolutions period, if that makes sense. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm open to any questions.
Real quick, Mike, could you explain how the resolutions process you think is going to change in the future?
Yes, next year actually it's going to be changing. They're going to change the subcommittee work a little bit, and they're going to go down into the weeds a little bit more and develop 5 committees utilizing executive committee members. It's going to be a breakout, and they're going to make them own and hopefully get the buy-in from the bigger cities to start getting involved in issues that have statewide implication. That's one area that's going to change. Another area that's going to change is to the format of the conference itself. I think you're going to, like this year will be 32 breakout sessions total. I think you're going to see a lot more in the coming years of sessions, especially issues pertaining to the state. You know, we're getting so much into pensions, we're getting so much into the TPC models. Reforms are growing, and so there's a need for more discussion and dialogue. And the only way that can happen is for everyone to participate. And so those are 2 key areas that I see.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Michael, if we had to do over again, would we go through the resolution process with the fire district issue?
I'm sorry.
Would we go through the resolution process if we had to do it again? Would we go through the resolution process with the fire district issue, with the county, or would we just author it ourselves, get our local legislatures on the agenda and put it through?
Very good question. And I think that is statewide implication. I think that will be something that will develop and will come back. Whether it be a resolution for this coming year, I'm not sure. I think the city of Peoria and city of Surprise, we are having ongoing discussions as to the next strategy, the next step, how we want to address that. But I mean, when you've got other areas that have the same implications that we do, and it will grow, we are just the poster childs right now,
Yes.
Surprise in Peoria. I think it'll have more ramifications and will be included in a resolution. It will be a part of the 91 city.
But will we go through the resolution process again, or would we just handle it ourselves and get it on?
I would like to say that we would probably have more emphasis on ourselves here.
Yes. Okay. That was my point. Because I know that I was at one of those meetings, and boy, that's an interesting environment, isn't it, John? Yeah, John's been through a lot more than I have, but and I know your point about the rural cities kind of get a voice in that, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just saying maybe there's some things we ought to just, I don't know about the resolutions. I also saw the interaction of the league and the impact fee issue, and that was an interesting dynamic because the legislature is not just because the league has a position, the legislature is so about it. It can have a negative impact sometimes.
Vice Mayor, absolutely. I mean, we've had a few other issues that we've seen the same outcomes involving that, but again, it's just a matter of the strategy that gets incorporated in that. But
right.
Yes, sir.
I think that the real message here is, they are an organization they're an advocacy organization advocating for cities. Mm-hmm. And as a city, we have to weigh each individual issue that we are confronted with and decide whether or not we want the league to advocate on our behalf on that particular issue, right, or if we feel that we could do a better job if we went it alone, mm-hmm, on our own, or if we developed our own coalition of a few neighboring communities, for example, that might have a similar issue. And I just think it would be helpful to Mike and to the city manager if they had a better idea of the kinds of issues that we think we ought to go it alone, because they're going to have to be, if we're going to go it alone, there's going to be costs of having some outside advocacy to assist us in that effort. So we're going to need to make sure that we are prepared for that.
Thank you, Mayor. And a good example of that is, as I mentioned earlier, is the SLIDS issue. There are 1,800 plus SLIDs in Maricopa County alone, and really only affects maybe 6 or 7 communities in the county. Now, is that something we need for a resolution? Probably not. We're probably going to pursue that in conjunction with other cities, no doubt, but it'll take a lead city. We would still have to find a champion, do all our due diligence as we would do with anything. So, I mean, that's something that we're going to have to, as a body here, discuss.
Councilmember Williams.
Yeah, and just to add to Mayor's point and Mike, statewide implication is the critical language there, and because and to Mayor, the league, we don't decide if the league is going to support it. We can, but then the league decides for us in the resolutions committee if they're going to support an issue. And so things like the SLID, I mean, that was our issue a few years ago. That was our issue. And in the executive committee in July, there wasn't an understanding of it. And in fact, I had one rural city say, well, we don't even have streetlights. Yeah. It wasn't an issue. It's not, we don't care about that. It's not, it doesn't impact everybody. And so those types of things, I would agree with Vice Mayor and with Mr. Celaya that those types of things we don't even bother, because if you don't have other support from other cities and key cities and folks on that resolutions committee that can speak and advocate from an educated standpoint on behalf of whatever issue that is, it's not going anywhere there. And just because it doesn't mean it goes anywhere in terms of state law or resolves the issue. So you might as well figure it out on your own with these types of things, whether it's the fire district issue or the SLID issue. It's almost a layer of bureaucracy you're adding on with the resolutions committee. I mean, it's great for, like you said, an advocacy group in terms of statewide issues, but not when we run into these problems and go, gosh, how do we fix this? Well, we need help. That might not be the route. So just from my limited experience going through the process, and I would agree with the rest of my colleagues.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks very much, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Last item.
Discussion regarding the impact fee ordinance.
Mr. Wiggenroth, are you going to perform that from your current seat, or are you going to have some help? Oh, you are going, the city attorney is going to brief us.
Play Misty for me.
Send Misty for me. I like that.
Did somebody say play Misty for me? Did I hear that again? I've never heard that ever. So a couple of things. You're going to actually see this 3 times. This is the ordinance that we are looking at passing. It is based on the model city ordinance that was put out by the league. This is a different thing than the impact fee resolution you are looking at later today. They're related only because they cover the same topic, but they're otherwise independent. Okay? So this is a brand new chapter. It's very, very thick. It's a complicated issue. So I'm going to just briefly go through it tonight, get a couple of issues I need input from you guys It'll come back on the 3rd in a more typical format that you would imagine seeing, which is the ordinance with the whereas clauses and those kinds of things. And then it'll actually come back for adoption the 2nd meeting in June. Okay, so it'll be effective August 3rd, which is the same time as the resolution you are passing tonight relative to impact fees, but it is 2 separate things, so I don't want you to get confused. We have on a number of occasions kind of gone through very large code changes, and it doesn't really work well with the whole little PowerPoint thing. So instead, I just did a PDF. One of the things that I think Councilmember Hall or Vice Mayor Hall noticed is there's an error statement in 2 of the sections. The model city ordinance, when it was passed out, the city of Marana made some changes and they embedded stuff in it. And so I thought that I had the embedded information removed, and then when we printed it, it didn't. So that's the error code. It's a reference. I just have to go find where it's tied to and delete the thing that's not there, that's invisible, but that's what that is. So I apologize for that. Anyway, so Chapter 106 in our city code is currently vacant. There's nothing there. Because this is such a large chapter, I'm recommending that we create 106 just for the impact fee ordinance. We define terms. One thing that you will see if you are familiar at all with Arizona Revised Statute Section 9463.05, which is the impact fee law, this is highly repetitive. The reason why it's highly repetitive is because there's holes in the state statute, and the model city ordinance is designed to plug some of those holes, and it's difficult to do that when you don't then fill in the background. So that's why it is highly repetitive. That said, if state law differs from our code, state law prevails. So it's really important that if they ever change that portion of state law, we will have to come and amend this ordinance, which is why typically we don't like to reincorporate state law, but in this instance we need to. So Section 1 is just the definitions. There are some definitions in the Model City Ordinance that are not here. We're currently reviewing those with city staff to decide, is this a definition we really need to have in our code or not? Particularly, those are relative to necessary public services. For example, the Model City Code defines water facilities. Do we want to define that? Because once you define that, you're married to the definition. So it's important you're careful when you define terms to define them in a way that is of most utility to you. And so some of the definitions in here might change, and we'll go over those. on June 3rd. It's just such a long chapter. I wanted you guys to have a chance to really kind of to review it in a big picture before we go through a more thorough workshop. So anyway, so we have the definitions. They're very long. And quite frankly, our version's much, much shorter than the Model City tax or the Model City ordinance because, you know, I don't like long things. Anyway, so the applicability section, the authority to assess, those are pretty much right out of state statute. Let me just get to the stuff I need to ask you. In the applicability section here, section 106-2, one of the things that I need your direction on is do you or do you not want to accept from impact fees city capital facilities? Some jurisdictions are. That is, when we build a facility, we don't charge ourselves impact fees, and some jurisdictions do not. Historically, we pay our own impact fees because we're part of development, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
Misty, I think if you state that question with a little bit more background,
sure,
that would be helpful. I know that some of us are have been around impact fees a little longer than others, and so if you're going to get full feedback from the council, I think
sure,
you're going to need to give a little more context.
No problem. So there's end users. When a developer comes in and they build something subject to impact fees, then they have to pay, whether it's general government, which is a grandfathered fee, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Do you want, when the city is the entity putting in, whether it's a recreation facility or a police substation or any use, our new building, City Hall, do you want us to pay impact fees that a developer, had they developed that land into a supermarket, would have to pay? So it's, when we build a building, do you want us to be a member of the market that has to pay impact fees, or do you want to exempt yourself?
And so what we would be doing is paying impact fees to ourselves.
We would be paying them to a designated fund to be utilized for a specified purpose, yeah.
In other words, it would be like saving up for the add-on, the addition to the house, or it would be saving up for the additional needs, capital needs for growth.
Yeah, a really good example is we have our own water services, and when we use water, we get a bill and we pay it because we're a user. Some municipalities would say, we get to use all the water we want for free because it's our water. So do you want to be considered a user for purposes of impact fees or not?
Vice Mayor.
I say no. Because we're building city facilities for our residents.
Correct.
They're really the end users, or they should be the end users. Okay? Be it a recreational facility or a water facility or whatever. We are facilitating, as a city, we're facilitating that asset being built for the benefit of our residents. So I don't think it makes any sense for us to contribute to impact fees. That's just the way I'm looking at it.
You mentioned that there were cities that did and cities that didn't. What are the advantages, one way or the other?
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah.
Well, when you are an end user, it's just the number in the denominator increases, quite frankly. So if you're programming an area of town, let's say your service area, let's use the service area I think you're familiar with on roadways, which is 163rd, the giant cul-de-sac at the end of the cul-de-sac. If we were to build a facility up there like the fire station that's eventually going to go there, if we exempt ourselves from that impact fee, then the city doesn't pay any portion of the cost of that roadway as far as impact fee goes. If you don't, then we would pay it, and we would be because we're part of the users that use that road, we're saying that we're going to pay our own fair share, as it were. Because the impact fees, remember, pay for growth. And part of the growth is our building of a fire station, if we do a police substation, if we do, any kind of a land purchase and then put, a sanitation truck facility there. We are part of that growth. So do you want to pay as a user or not? And I know Vice Mayor Hall has said that he does not, but that's only one of 7.
Right.
And I'm trying to pull information out to try to help us have a greater dialogue about that, because if in fact growth is to pay for itself, we have impact fees that are, growth never fully pays for itself.
Nope.
And let's just be straight about that. And but impact fees are a way of helping to facilitate that new growth,
Right.
and at least collect something on behalf of the new growth needs and the impact on the city. However, if you pay impact fees as a city,
You're diluting it.
are you actually paying twice?
Kind of. Yeah.
It depends on how much the impact fees are subsidizing the expenditure. So if you build a roadway and you reimburse over time with the cost of money, you're not getting 100% value back. And you are encumbering funds. I mean, you're basically taking money out of the general fund and putting it in a restricted account to reimburse, either reimburse whether it's through financing or debt, or to save up for the construction of the facility to which the impact fee applies. So it's really a policy decision. Do you want to be treated like a user, or not? And you get to decide. It's drafted in the Model City Code to be exempt.
Yeah.
Councilmember Biondo.
Thank you, Mayor. My inclination is not. It seems to me I don't see the huge advantage, for one thing, other than you're banking some money in a special little fund somewhere in order to take care of those kinds of future things. But it seems to me if in fact there's really effective, comprehensive future planning, then the city's anticipating that cost anyway. So to have a separate little bank for those funds, I'm not sure I see a great advantage there. My inclination is not for the city not to act as a quote-unquote user.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Tandy.
I kind of see it two ways. One is the accounting for it, how we account for it, but I also see it as a policy issue where, in one sense, if we charge ourselves impact fees, we're kind of tying our hands and saying you have to do it, even though we can do it anyway, and we can set the money aside anyway. So, in one way, it takes away some of our flexibility. But I kind of would like to see if our CFO has any thoughts on the accounting treatment of it, or any ups or downs, or things we should consider while making this decision. Any ideas?
Madam Chair, members of the council, I think the accounting treatment would be very straightforward. So not to reject your question, but I do think it's a policy issue. But I will, since you gave me the opportunity, the floor, most of the facilities that we would be building would probably be in response to growth. And so we'd be building a project that in some cases will be paid for by impact fees. And so I can see the potential circular paying for something twice, and maybe in the end that might answer your question about accounting treatment as well. So I can see some of the policy discussion that's been raised so far, that it may not make sense for us to pay for that project that was built to serve growth.
Anyone else?
We're up to 3.
No, I don't know. Did we get
Good that you can count since
message?
you're passing the budget.
Had
in a
my
couple
light
weeks.
on for a while.
Did we get a head nod from you, Councilmember Tandy? Okay, so we're now up to 4. Councilmember Villanueva.
I feel that we shouldn't be paying impact fees. I know that in the past there's been some other projects that they waive the impact fees for other buildings, to help out the businesses that are coming in. But as for us, I don't believe that we should.
Good. Anybody want to advocate to pay impact fees? Because I'm sensing we have a consensus here.
I'm sensing sarcasm. So what I'm hearing is that we want to go with the model city language. And so with that, we'll move on. Again, I'm not going to go through every little thing. I have just a couple of questions. I do really want you guys to try to read through it, as painful as that might be in the next couple of weeks. But that's why we're going through it initially now. We'll go through it again in another workshop on the 3rd, and then you'll finally get to vote on it on the 17th of June. So the next question I want to talk about is section 106-5. Well, let me back up. I don't have a question for you, but I do want you to pay particular note to section 106-4. That is the grandfathered facilities. And in essence, this is one of those holes that we here at the City of Surprise are keenly aware of, given certain litigation in which we've been involved. So this is one of those areas where there's this and then the definition of debt and the definition of grandfathered facilities that are very important. The state statute does not define what debt is, what financing is. The Model City Ordinance defines financing as debt to include interfund loans, and then grandfathered facilities is basically anything for which the city has pledged impact fees to repay financing or debt. Now again, that's in interfund loans. So the Model City Ordinance anticipates that which I believe the entire statute anticipates, which is when you have cash in one pot, you are allowed to borrow against it to pay for facilities as long as you repay yourself. And I understand that, some people might be confused by, well, you're paying yourself back, but you're really not. If you really think about it, it's different accounts. You're not borrowing from your checking to put money back in your checking. You're borrowing from your kids' school savings to pay for your mortgage, and then you have to repay that. So it's not exactly the same thing as borrowing from yourself. So it's just an important thing that you see. That's one of the holes that was in the state law, which is why we need to kind of regurgitate a lot of the state law here. So going into section 106-5, the Model City Ordinance anticipates that there's going to be developers that come in and disagree with whether or not an impact fee applies or which impact fee applies, because they vary depending on square footage, pipe size, and the kind of development that it is, commercial versus residential versus industrial. So there's an appeal process, and the Model City Ordinance anticipates multiple layers of appeal. That is, first it would go to the city or the community development director, then it would go to the city manager, then it would go to the city council. And what I am recommending to you to do, and what I need your feedback on, is to really shorten that up. And if there's a problem with it, it goes to the city manager decides, and we're done. And that we define something missing from the Model City Code is how long after that assessment is made does somebody have to appeal it? Because what I don't want you guys to get into, and I want the city to get into, is a situation where somebody gets an assessment and 6 months later they decide, well, golly gee willikers, I want my money back, and so they do this appeal process. And so what I'm recommending is that we do 15 days of the assessment, and the assessment's made at the time of the permit. So they come in, they get the permit, they're assessed the impact fee. The way I have it written is they have to pay cash for the impact fee, no financial assurance. They have 15 days to file with the clerk a written appeal. That goes to the city manager decides. That decision is final. If the decision is overturned, then a refund is issued. If it's upheld, then they just move forward. So I need feedback from you guys on a couple of things. One is to make sure that you're okay with just that one level of appeal to the city manager. I'm hearing head nods. That you're okay with a 15-day window. That's basically 2 weeks. And days would be calculated on business days. So if the 15th day is a Saturday, they would actually have then until the following Monday to file the appeal with the city clerk. Are you guys okay with a 2-week opportunity? Okay, I don't see any no's. Are you okay with the city clerk being the repository of those appeals? Thought being that as the document custodian, that kind of made sense. And then the other thing is relative to the model code has the option of doing pay cash now or provide financial assurance. The difficulty with financial assurance, that is something against which we could collect if they don't actually come back and pay the money if the appeal fails, is that's a really big administrative pain to get against that financial assurance. So I would just recommend we just do pay it up front, we'll refund it if. So do I have anybody who wants to do financial assurance? Okay.
Misty, by the way, this whole, I mean, I read this document, and you did a really good job on this.
Well, I can't take all the credit. I mean, it was a model city ordinance, and I just went through it.
But you went through and made adjustments like this, which adds a lot of value, I think. I appreciate it.
So other than those embedded reference points that I will fix, those are the questions that I had. And so basically it looks, from your feedback, I'm not going to have to change a whole lot, unless from reading it you guys had a question, an area of concern. Do I have any of that?
Are there any questions, members, from the document that you were presented for the packet this evening? No questions?
And I don't expect you guys to, that tonight's your final say. So if you have questions, you can give me a call, or we are going to bring it back for work session. To the extent that I make changes in this version, I will bring back a red line version so you can see if we, for example, decide to go ahead and add some definitions, that you can see which definitions we added, things like that. So you can tell the changes between this version and what you see on the third. Otherwise, you'll see an ordinance in the typical format with the pretty whereas clauses and whatnot. Anything else?
Questions? Very good. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, Councilman or Vice Mayor?
So you don't expect this to be a compendium?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Very good. Thanks very much. Thanks, Misty. All right. Next item is call to the public. Is there anyone registered for call to the public on this particular meeting?
None, Mayor.
Much. And I see no other business before the council in this work session agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.